benchmarking. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We are excited to be kicking off the first in a series of HR related webinars that Club Benchmarking will be hosting in partnership with Mike Wales from Paychecks. Before we go ahead and get started, I do want to go over a couple of housekeeping items with everyone. All of the attendees will be on mute for the duration of the webinar just because we are recording and we're going to try and keep the background noise to a minimum. If you do have questions, we hope that you will enter them into the chat panel, which you'll see to the right of your screen in a webinar box, and then we will answer those questions for you at the end. Just to give you a little background on the webinar series, the idea for this series spurred out of some conversations that we were having with private club human resources directors and managers that we meet with on an annual basis at the HR symposium. And there was this pretty universal consensus that among HR managers in the private club industry, there was a lack of a constant network and industry-specific resources. And a lot of these HR directors had come from other industries where they were used to having industry-specific information and data and policies at their fingertips. And so we've been working with those HR professionals over the past couple of years through the symposium to really grow that network. And now we're excited to kick off this webinar series as a continuation of that education and to meet the goal of providing private club HR managers with an ongoing industry-specific resource that they can use. And we were connected to Mike Wales, who's a senior consultant with Paychecks through his work with private clubs. So Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you for a minute to talk a little bit about your background and experience with private clubs.
Hello everybody, this is Mike Wales. I've been with Paychecks for 20 plus years. Happy to partner. I met Ray, the founder of Club Benchmarking, where he gave it just a tremendous overview of what they were doing at our local Desert Hospitality Accounts Association, which is primarily made up with controllers of the private clubs. And we got on the conversation about it's all about good data. That's really where Ray saw the need when he was a board member of, hey, we need better data as a board. And that's where club benchmarking came about, is better data that gives better decisions and better discussions. So I was happy to partner with them to help. If you're with Paychecks, email me. We'll get the data to club benchmarking a lot easier than you trying to do it yourself. But this series really is about empowering you, the HR, to have a higher level of conversations by having better knowledge. And so, Koki, why is HR so important, especially in the private clubs? When you think about the average tenure of a GM in a private club versus the average tenure of the HR person, you're really the glue of the organization long term. You're the bridge within an organization. And if you kind of think of it, the bridge analogy, without a bridge, you can't cross the divisions, right? You've got your grounds crew, you've got your food and beverage, you've got the golf shop. All are focused on the common mission of providing that superior membership experience, but they come from very different areas, and you all are, as HR, that bridge between all of them. And so, and really what it is really the trust, right? You all have to build that trust between everybody, and HR is really, that's what your function is when you get around to all the other miscellaneous minutia that you have to deal with on a federal level or a state level. Certainly in certain states, you'll have job security for your entire lifetime because the states are so crazy. But that's what it is. You've got to build that trust. And then when you think of Ron's presentation today, kind of a segue into this, if you don't have the trust of the employees, are they going to trust you enough as an organization to raise their hand and say, I heard this, I saw this? So I want to challenge you on that is when Ron's talking to you, which is really, really important stuff in today's world, make sure, do you feel you have that trust of the employee? And I'm just going to throw this out and challenge you a little bit. And maybe some of you are going, oh, I've got the trust of employees. Absolutely. They trust me. They love the club. So here's something I'm going to challenge you. Look at the participation of your retirement plan, if you have one, And I would suggest with my 20 plus years of experience, the participation rate in the organization's retirement plan is a direct reflection of the trust your employees have in you. So if you can say to yourself right now, I got 80% participation, you have unbelievable trust in your organization. If you're at the opposite end of the spectrum of 10%, then when you're talking about everything that Ron's going to talk about today, just know you've got an uphill battle to get the employees to trust the organization enough to do what Ron's going to suggest they need to do in order to be part of this solution. So with that, Al, I can't wait to have you hear from Ron. He is a phenomenal individual, great resources, incredible depth of knowledge from protecting us all, protecting the president as the Secret Service, and he's continuing that mission for many years. So without further ado, Ron.
Well, good afternoon. As mentioned, I spent 23 years as an agent with the U.S. Secret Service, trained in emergency response, security risk vulnerability assessments, and threat assessments as it relates to threats against the president. I brought that concept to private industry with my company. And so by way of introduction, we've been in business now for 25 years. And today, I want to talk to you about some issues regarding, security and in particular, targeted violence prevention and active threat response. By way of just telling you, we have some experience with private clubs, and we've done some security risk vulnerability and consulting with private clubs. So I'm pretty aware of some of the issues. And by way of introduction, I'm also a golfer. So I've been on a lot of golf courses, and I spend a lot of time on golf courses with various people that we protect. So with that, let's get right into the presentation. The targeted violence and active threat is going to be a part of this, but let's start off by talking about private clubs because they have a unique threat landscape. First of all, most private clubs have a high net worth clientele, and because of that, they can be targets from cyber hacking. And I ran the financial fraud unit for Secret Service, and one of the issues was identity theft, and these cyber hackers go after personal identities to make money off them and attack private office entities. So one of the issues for private clubs is how to protect their clientele personal identification in their system. And although that's not a major part of this presentation today, I just wanted to mention it, that you do it with defense in depth and tiered security. The other issue is that you have extended perimeter, large perimeters with multiple access and egress points, and this becomes an issue because there's so many ways into the property and onto the property. So one of the things that we recommend is to do a physical and IT security risk vulnerability assessment, meaning that you can't have IT security without physical security, and you can't have physical security without IT security to provide a full secure environment. We call that convergence. And a security plan has to have protocols, procedures, and needs to be in place for liability protection. If something happens that concerns security on your property, one of the issues is, do you have a plan? And we've come upon this on many instances where no plan was a part of the club, and basically they're had to deal with the fact that they had limited liability protection in this arena. You also need an emergency response plan that includes natural disasters, fires, earthquakes, floods, information systems backups, and violent man-made disasters such as targeted violence by dysfunctional employee or client or visitor. These security plans and emergency response plans should provide protection of people, information system, and facilities. A physical and IT assessment identifies specific vulnerabilities. And once those vulnerabilities are identified, then it becomes incumbent on patching those vulnerabilities. And the assessment begins, the physical assessment begins at the curtilage or outer boundary of the property, such as gates or parking lots. IT identifies hotspots to transfer your data in the event that it's compromised. You have to have a hotspot to transfer that data immediately. You identify access egress controls, meaning you take a look at your cameras, card readers, guard force, whether they're armed or unarmed, and their post orders, which are very important because, and I don't want to get into this, but post orders are very important so that you have an understanding that what those guards are going to do. Identify entrances, exit doors, identify written policies and procedures in a security plan and emergency response plan. Once you do that, you identify methods of communication with employees, first responders, such as law enforcement, EMT personnel. Now, based on the fact that you do these security risk vulnerability and emergency response plans, let's move into the issue of the day, which is targeted violence, and it's a growing issue that needs to be addressed. First of all, one of the reasons we call it targeted violence prevention and active threat response instead of active shooter response is because I did some interesting research. For instance, in 2016, 467 folks were killed by knives. And in 2016, 123 were killed in mass shootings. Now, that doesn't incorporate random acts of violence, and I'll make a distinction of that as we move through the presentation. And as you can see from the statistics, we are increasing every year in folks killed through mass shootings. And how do we determine a person or a perpetrator is moving towards a propensity for violence? So let me explain that there is no certain profile of a person who's going to engage in shooting somebody or killing somebody. The reality is that they used to say, oh, a person who's 35 to 45 and he's white and he's not married might be a person that is a potential perpetrator of violence. That is not the position of a profile. We profile based on behaviors, what a person does and what a person says. And it is a process, it's not an event. And what I mean by that, random act of violence is a robber goes into a 7-Eleven to rob the store. And then while he is robbing the store, something occurs and he shoots the person behind the counter. That's called a random act of violence. Targeted violence is totally different. It's a process. Somebody starts acting out, sending messages that they have a propensity for violence. And as they become more specific in the message, they become more dangerous. So it's a process. And all shootings and all killings that we have examined, those perpetrators of violence have sent messages, i.e. through social media or written or behavioral messages. And in many instances, they weren't received, interpreted right, or ignored. And the only shooting that we have ever examined historically that doesn't have this process involved is the shooting that occurred in Las Vegas on October 1st, 2017, when Stephen Paddock opened fire at the 91 Harvest Music Festival and killed 58 people. 500 were injured or wounded in that scenario. So what is it that we identify a perpetrator as moving through a process? And there are three things that we take a very dynamic look at, and that is threat posturing, preparatory behaviors, and rehearsal fantasies. Threat posturing, making veiled threats or direct threats. Preparatory behaviors, buying weapons, target practicing, and rehearsal fantasies. And I'm going to expound on those three because that's what we use when we are assessing whether a person is moving through the process and becoming more dangerous. Threat posturing, what do I mean by that? Threat communicated, is it direct, indirect, conditional, and plausible? What if I said to you, if you keep this up, I'm going to get you? Is that a threat? Yes, it is. It's a veiled threat. But if I become more specific, for instance, if I said, if you keep this up, I'm going to shoot you. I'm going to kill you. Now you're being more specific. And the more specific you get, and the more frequency you engage in threats, the more dangerous you are becoming. In other words, you're moving into operational, that you're going to basically perpetrate this act of violence. When people are showing a propensity for violence, they do so in many ways. One is through verbal, written, text messages. A big one is now social media postings. And I'm going to take you through a couple of case studies when we're talking about this. Hostile, aggressive behaviors on a person, verbal or physical. Personal space intrusion, malicious glaring, mad dogging. Showing intense anger, hostile, aggressive behaviors on objects, vandalism, destruction of property, throwing, breaking objects, punching walls, pounding tables, and slamming doors. And there is a difference between justified anger and the anger that we're talking about here. For instance, if you followed me around on the golf course, you might think that I'm a potential perpetrator of violence. Just kidding. But hostile, aggressive behaviors are distinctive in nature because they show intense, unjustified anger. And you also have to look at, is there a history of violent behaviors? Because put under stress, people revert back to the way they believe and have been raised and handle stress. You have to take a look at recent behaviors. Have they escalated in intensity, frequency, and duration? Preparatory behaviors would include investing time and resources, meaning researching and planning, checklist, procurement of weapons, ammo, equipment, supplies, and predatory behaviors, meaning surveillance and stalking, open source data searches of targets, probing and breaching, testing security and responses, timings and trial runs. And I want to get back. All perpetrators who get involved in targeted violence have these distinctive characteristics. That is threat posturing, preparatory behaviors, and rehearsal fantasies. They think about it. They obsess on it. They get fixated with malicious themes and violent occurrences. Reoccurring scripting of malicious acts. They repeat communications of what will transpire, usually leakage where they can't contain themselves and they talk about violence, romanticizing past instances of violence, costuming. They see themselves as an omnipotent character who has been basically discriminated against. They see themselves as a victim. And with these rehearsal fantasies, they start revealing what's in their mind, such as providing a manifesto and video, social media. So these fantasies come to life, and if you're listening intently to somebody who you think might be dangerous, those things continually reoccur. That is threat posturing, rehearsal fantasies, and preparatory behaviors. Any two out of those three that make their ugly head and rise, you should be very concerned. Let's just talk real quickly, and I want to move through this quickly because I need to get to prevention. But I also want to give you 3 case studies that I think clearly show what we're talking about with threat posturing, preparatory behaviors, and rehearsal fantasies. Christopher Dorner is a classic case. Christopher Dorner was on Los Angeles Police Department. He was terminated as a young officer. He didn't make the grade. He became extremely angry. On February 1st, 2013, he sent a package to Anderson Cooper at CNN with a DVD making allegations against LAPD. He was extremely angry that he got terminated, and so he began obsessing. February 3rd, 2013, Dorner ambushed and killed Monica Kwan and her fiance, Keith Lawrence, in Irvine as they got into their car at their apartment. Why did he choose Monica Kwan and fiance? Her father, Captain Kwan, was on LAPD and in fact tried to save Dorner's job and was in his corner. But for some reason, Dorner took it out on Monica Kwan, the captain's daughter, and killed her. On February 4th, a manifesto from Dorner appeared on his Facebook outlining his plan to kill LAPD officers, and he declares war on the police. On February 7th, Dorner shoots and kills 2 Riverside police officers. One dies, and the other is in critical condition but survives. On February 12th, he shoots a San Bernardino sheriff who dies, and Dorner dies in a suicide in a fire. One of the more dreadful shootings and the perpetrator acting out occurred with Elliot Rogers. And if you want to go to the YouTube video, Elliot Rogers Retribution, you will see a young man who's engaged in threat posturing, rehearsal fantasies, and preparatory behaviors. This is a clear indication of somebody moving through the process and becoming more and more dangerous. And usually what happens is as they move through this process and they become more and more dangerous, a triggering event occurs. And in this case, you can see some of the things he did. But what drove him as a triggering event was that he attended a party, and at that party, he was inappropriately approaching young ladies, trying to get their attention. It became apparent to some of the guys, and they kind of slapped him around and threw him off of a porch. That triggered him to decide that he was going to attack. And that became his process, and that became his triggering event. So you can see all the things he did. I don't want to move through that because we need to get on to some of the other things. My point in trying to show you these case studies is to reveal to you the process that occurs. And so Elliot Rogers is probably the one that that most generally fits the process. The last one I want to mention is Nicholas Cruz in Parkland, Florida. Again, this young man for 2 years engaged in threat posturing, making threats on the internet, making threats through social media. He was talked to by the sheriff's department on numerous occasions. But again, all of the things that he posted, all of the things he did not, there was no intervention done. That's the point. Nothing was done to deter him. So part of being threat assessment is threat management. Once you know that somebody is moving towards a violent act and has propensity for violence, there has to be intervention. And in this case, he's a classic case that fell through the cracks because there were a number of people that knew that he was moving in this direction. So
that's a good point, Ron. We've had somebody kind of pipe up on that point, which is this is really tough stuff. It's hard for me to listen to. It's challenging. However, a good challenge would be to think about your employees and also think about members or guests of members or family members of your members and think about how this comes into play. So where Ron's going to go next is sort of applying how you can position your team to be ready to respond.
Right. So one of the things that you start with is internally looking at your own employees and to best get a handle on your employees. When you screen applicants, do a thorough job of screening those applicants, examine their resumes, check references, verify work history and their educational, criminal background checks, obviously. And I don't want to get off onto a dirt road, but we have had instances where we got involved in threat assessment and found out that the company hired people that had previous charges with assault with a deadly weapon and everything else because the backgrounds weren't done thoroughly. The biggest, the most important aspect of hiring good people comes through the interview process, asking narrative questions that reveal what the person is all about. And for instance, I sat on the board that hired Secret Service agents after, in the latter part of my career. We were given 42 questions to ask. These questions were narrative questions that required the person to reveal their thought patterns. And for instance, you ask the person, what is the best boss you ever worked for and why? So that he has to tell you. And what you're looking for is the word trust. And the reply should have been to that question, well, I trusted them. I had trust in them, because that revealed what their prime belief system is. They believed in trust as the most important characteristic. The 7 principles of constructive confrontation: when you know that somebody is acting out is to prepare, address the specific behavior, address only the specific behavior, and be flexible. Listen to allow the person to respond and vent and share their feelings, because we've been involved in a number of these threat assessments where somebody has been started acting out, showing a lot of anger, and moving into what we would refer to as a employee at risk. What we found out with some of these cases is that the person was dealing with some very stressful events in their life. Their mate was dying of cancer, or they were having financial issues that put undue stress on them and was causing them to be very angry. So listen and have them share their feelings, because maybe they're not becoming dangerous as much as they are angry about their plight in life. Don't engage in one-upmanship, and offer assistance, options, and counseling, EAP. But when somebody is truly dangerous and they're moving and they're showing threat, posturing, rehearsal fantasies, and preparatory behaviors, those three items in behavioral parlance, then it becomes time for significant intervention. And those crisis intervention, you should have a team prepared to intervene. That should be Director of Human Resources, General Counsel. If you have somebody who's a head of security, a psychologist, and outside consultant. That is to assess whether the person is truly dangerous, to monitor, track, document, and direct a course of action. Becomes important. The secret sauce in threat assessment is actually threat management. Once you know that somebody is moving towards a propensity for violence, what is it that you do to deter that individual from acting out? And that becomes the secret sauce and science in threat management and threat assessment and threat management. You have to identify the thing that the individual holds as hope, and determine what you can do to deter that individual from acting out. Stage 2 intervention might mean that you have armed intervention, investigation to confirm the threat and make a threat assessment. When I say profile of a perpetrator, I'm not talking about gender, race, or anything else, because people who perpetrate acts of violence are Caucasian, African American, Asian, Hispanic, and it's not gender friendly. Where you have dogs, you have dogettes. Although most of your acts of targeted violence occur from males, but we have had several female involved shootings and acts of violence. Review the company guidelines to determine whether suspension or termination are in order pursuant to policy. Confront the individual with specific details of the threat and offense. If not an employee, report the incident to appropriate authorities and take security precautions. Allow all of the employee to present their version of the incidents. Document the meeting and the statement of the offender. Suspend or terminate and confiscate company property and escort the employee from premises. Now, here's a controversial order on number 8. Consider a TRO, temporary restraining order. I have to caution the audience on just going for a temporary restraining order. My daughter, who happens to be a labor law attorney, would tell you that if a client calls and says somebody's acting out, making threats, she would advise them immediately to get a temporary restraining order. That is, not to allow the people that are making these kind of threats back on property. I contend that every incident, every threat assessment incident is to be analyzed separately, because there are situations where you don't want to issue a TRO on an individual, especially if the individual has a severe mental illness, because in many instances, truly mentally ill people will see this as a bull, like viewing a red cape. And this is where real professional forensic psychology comes in to determine whether or not a TRO should be issued. That's why I do my work with Dr. Manny Tao, who is a forensic psychologist, to threat management. I'm very good at threat assessment, but when it comes to managing a threat, you need a real professional, and that's why I work with Dr. Manny Tao. So when we talk in terms of an act of violence, the three things you need to understand is immediately get out of harm's way, warn others, and contact law enforcement authorities. When you're engaged in talking about violence, you need to identify pre-attack planning. In other words, develop a mindset to question something that may appear out of the ordinary. An unfamiliar van or on the street, a person acting suspicious and stalking, surveilling a person or location. And in particular, listen to your employees. One of the things that has used to shock me, doesn't shock me anymore, is when somebody is acting out over a long period of time, management and HR never heard about it. And the reason is because the employees see it. They see somebody making threats. They see somebody extremely angry. They hear somebody talking about a violent act, but they don't tell anybody. And I used to really be perplexed by that. Why wouldn't somebody bring that to the attention of management? And in one case, we had somebody that actually slit his wrist at his desk and left work, and the employees saw it and didn't pass it along. The reason that I figured out by interviewing multiple employees was that they didn't want to get involved because they didn't want to become a target of the individual. They were afraid that this person, if they found out that they turned them in, would turn their wrath on them. So what am I saying? It's very incumbent on HR and managers to stay very in tune with their employees. We recommend an employee information line where they can anonymously call in on an 800 number and voice their concerns without identifying themselves, so that HR and managers know that there's a problem in the workforce. Listen to what a person says that indicate precursor behavior or a propensity for violence. In all of our studies, we find that people who perpetrate targeted violence actually talk about it, and they tell you what they're thinking. Document observations or verbal discussions. In situational awareness, you have to develop a mindset for cognitive recognition. When I was in the Secret Service, we were taught cognitive recognition with a simple process of green light, yellow light, red light. In a green light environment, such as your home, you should feel safe and secure in your home, and you should be in a green light mode. The moment you step out of your home, you may still be in a familiar environment, like an office or social setting, but you should be your mind should be clicked on for more cognitive recognition of your surroundings. A red light concept is that you are in completely unfamiliar environment. My wife still thinks that I'm a little paranoid because when I step out to get the newspaper, I look up and down the street. I want to see if there's anything unusual. If I see a van that wasn't there before and it doesn't look out of place, I take the license plate because I'm still a little paranoid. That's because when I step out of my house, out of the front door, I click on to a yellow light mode. When you're in a completely unfamiliar environment, you should be very aware of everything around you and the people that are around you. So what do you do as a company, as a club? You prepare for a potential incident. You determine escape paths to a secure environment. You identify safe rooms or areas to hide in the event of an incident. You identify weapons or obstacles that can be used against a perpetrator, such as chairs, fire extinguishers, pointed pins, or pencils. You should also practice group reaction to a perpetrator, stacking next to a door, or attacking the attacker before she or he can react. And develop relationships with local law enforcement, Department of Homeland Security, FBI. That singular bit of advice is very important to establish an effective relationship with your local police department or sheriff's department. It's very important to do that and develop communication that if somebody sees something unusual or threatening, to say something. And develop a plan. Train employees and managers in recognizing dysfunctional behaviors that indicate a propensity for violence. Remember what we talked about: threat posturing, preparatory behaviors, and rehearsal fantasies. Conduct a security risk assessment of the facility. Develop situational awareness. Train managers and employees to be cognizant of their surrounding and suspicious behavior. And develop tabletop exercises for quick reactions. Train employees in law enforcement response and media response. Incorporate active shooter response in your emergency response plan. When an incident happens, people respond to the way they are trained. Given that in 1999 at Columbine High School in Colorado, those kids that were assaulted by Eric Klebold and Eric Harris, Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris, when they came into the school, first of all, that's a very unusual assault because they did not plan on entering the school to shoot people. They placed gas in cylinders and put timing devices on them because they intend to blow up and harm people from homemade bombs that they constructed. When they didn't go off, that's when they came in as shooters. But the kids responded by hiding under tables in the cafeteria. That's because they were trained for earthquakes to hide under desks and tables, but they became immovable objects and targets. So what I'm saying is train for an incident like this so that people understand that they have options. And the options are run, hide, or fight. When an incident occurs and you hear shots fired or an assault occurring, escape away from the attack. Take as many people who may be in the line of fire with you. And by the way, there is a very good Homeland Security video on this very topic of run, hide, and fight. Activate any emergency notification system to alert others, notify police, hide, locate rooms without glass, and preferably one door that can be secured. Turn the sound off on your cell phone. Look for potential weapons in the event your room is penetrated by the perpetrator, such as a fire extinguisher or a chair. The last option is fight, and you have to train employees to be aggressive and attack the attacker, because most people shy away from this, and they have to be trained in order to mentally prepare to fight in order to save their life. Rarely do shooters respond to someone pleading for their life. Remember, they've chosen to kill, not to be swayed by empathy, because they have none. So in conclusion, targeted violence is a process, meaning that somebody starts acting out, they start sending messages, and the more specific they get, the more dangerous they are. Unchecked aberrant and dysfunctional behavior leads to an escalation of aberrant and dysfunctional behavior. That means that the individual is moving towards an act of violence. They have the propensity for violence, and if they are gone unchecked for that behavior, they will continue along this path. A person, remember something, a person who does not care about himself or herself or the consequences of their action is potentially dangerous to others. And a person who has lost all hope is potentially dangerous. And the normal progression of a violent act is thought, verbal threat, and action. And with that, I'm finished with the PowerPoint. We have about 10 minutes to go. As you can see, this is my phone number is on this last slide, and my email address is down below in the event that you'd like to contact us further. So that wraps up the PowerPoint and the information today. I hope it's been beneficial to
That's great, Ron. Thank you. Again, very challenging, but important stuff. If you have questions,
that a lot of people don't like to hear, but they need to, because this particular issue of targeted violence is here, and it's kind of unfortunate. I don't want to get into politics or anything like that, but there's a lot of vitriol that is occurring in our society today. There's a lot of anger. People are acting out, and it's become, it's the civility of our society is deteriorating, and I'm concerned about that. And
yeah. Well, I'm glad that you were able to join us to start a conversation. I don't see any questions. You can type any questions you might have in the chat pane. We will be distributing a copy of the video. Mike Wales, did you have anything you wanted to add or any observations? I'm trying to unmute you. Mike, if you're there, go ahead and weigh in. Otherwise, I think that, oh, Mary, can you jump in and explain the SHRM credits?
Yes, happy to. Ron, thank you again for presenting. It is important information. I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but this HR webinar series will be SHRM approved for SHRM recertification credits, as well as some HRCI certification credits. This first webinar is approved for SHRM. The activity ID is on the screen. All you have to do is log into your SHRM account and provide the date and activity ID.
Mary, I would add that this presentation is certified by the California Bar Association for MCLE credits, in the event that you have any attorneys in the audience.
Excellent. Thank you.
This is Mike. I just want to, I know this was really tough. I've heard Ron before, and it's usually kind of a shocked audience when people are done. But just wanted to share a story. It's true. You need to not just look, you really need to look at your members. Ron talked about screening your employees. I would suggest you also need to look at screening members, whatever way you're going to figure out a way to do that politically correct, so you are avoiding people with anger issues. But unfortunately, there was a situation out here in a private club where a very, very high-level retired executive happened to meet another member. The two of them decided to create a relationship, but that high-end retired executive was married still. The spouse ended up finding both of them in a home instead of doing it in the club. She did find them in a home, killed them both, and then committed suicide herself a few years ago. But just as could have easily been in the club where the two of them met. So just kind of want to throw that out. This is another reality check. Again,
Mike,
really, really high-end club.
Mike, could I end by just, giving the audience a personal observation? Years ago, 1996 to be accurate, worked out at a health club, and this guy appeared. There were about 20 of us that worked out at this health club, starting about 5:30 in the morning. Guy makes an appearance. The big buffed out white guy. Everybody went over to be friendly, and he rebuffed him. You could tell he was extremely angry. I started watching him, and I could tell that this guy was moving towards being dangerous. He did several things. For instance, two Asian gentlemen were in the gym, and they were laughing, and he dropped his weights and went over there and said if they just didn't stop laughing at him, he was going to take care of them. And that told me that he was dangerous. The gentleman's name was Daniel Marsden. One day he came to the club. I was not there that day. One of the gentlemen that I worked out with walked outside. He motioned for him to come over. He had never spoken to him before. He opened the back door of his car, and he had assault rifles and all kinds of weapons in his back seat. Unfortunately, the witness did not say anything to anybody. And that afternoon, Daniel Marsden went into his place of work in Santa Fe Springs, California, and killed 4 people, and drove to Inglewood and shot himself. That was something that I witnessed. I witnessed firsthand of a person who was moving in the direction of becoming a perpetrator of violence. And it always sat with me, and that's one of the reasons why I try and address this issue to as many people as I can, because it's unfortunate, but these things happen in our society.
Okay, well, I think Ron, if I don't see any additional questions here, I do have one individual that had a question that I'm going to actually pass to you by email, so that that person's connected with you and you can discuss it that way. Okay.
Well, I
So
hope today I didn't put anybody in shock, but this this issue in particular is one that every company, every club needs to deal with and start positioning themselves to detect and deter and respond.
okay, well, on that note, I think we'll go ahead and conclude for today. Thank you for joining us, and we'll be sending a follow-up email with a link to the video probably within about 24 hours. You should have that, and then we'll be announcing the next webinar. Mary, what is the date of the next webinar?
The date is December 18th, which is also a Wednesday, and it'll be the same time, 3 p.m. Eastern.
Okay, very good. All right, thank you for joining us, everyone.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Mike.
Bye-bye.